Hello, welcome back to our study in archaeology in support of the Bible. I am glad you're back. I personally enjoy looking at history and especially archaeology, and the fact that I love the Bible, and then to combine the two together where we can see that what we refer to as secular history corresponds with that which we read in the Bible, biblical history. Well, we have been studying the inscriptions that are found that help us to identify certain locations and places in the Bible, and it identifies with what archaeologists have found with being exactly what we read in the Bible. When we left off, we had talked about the Ahab ring. In 1 Kings 21, we read of a plot that Jezebel sets up to kill Naboth. In verse 8, we read that she wrote letters in Ahab's name, and she sealed them with his seal, and sent the letters to the elders and the nobles who were dwelling in the city with Naboth. That she wrote these letters and she sealed them with Ahab or the king's signet is a way of making sure that a message was kept secret until it reached its intended recipient. And what would be done, they would pour wax on the edges where they sealed it. They would have a ring that would have an impression that would imprint upon it, and it would make this seal. And if that seal were broken, then you knew that that message had been previously read, or it could have even been tampered with. And so this practice was one that's been used for a very long time to ensure the secret or the contents of a letter was kept intact until it reached who it was intended for. Now, here we have a signet ring with the inscription Ahab, king of Israel. And Ahab was king from 874 to 853 BC, and he was married to Jezebel. There is also evidence of King Ahab outside of the Bible when we look to the Assyrian record. In the Assyrian record, it speaks of King Ahab's participating in a battle of Kokar in 853 BC against the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III. At this time, Shalmaneser faced 11 kings at Kokar, led by Hadadezer, also called Adad-Edir, and possibly to be identified with Ben-Hadad II of Damascus. And with him as a king was King Ahab of Israel. There is also two monoliths referred to as the Kirk monoliths, and that these list kings that fought Shalmaneser. And it says that along with these other kings, 2,000 chariots and 10,000 men of Ahab, king of Israel. So it identifies Ahab and as a king of Israel. It's believed to be the only reference to Israel in the Assyrian and Babylonian records. They were found in the town of Kirk in Turkey in 1861. Shalmaneser boasts that his troops inflicted 14,000 casualties upon the Allied army, capturing countless chariots and horses, and describes the damage that they inflicted on his enemies in this savage battle in detail. Shalmaneser's opponents held on to their thrones after the battle, although Ahab did die shortly afterwards in an unrelated battle. Hadadezer was king of Damascus until at least 841 BC. We see that the secular record, these monoliths, the signet rings, these hold exactly in accordance with what we read in the Bible. They are in harmony and help us to see the Bible is true. Between 1974 and 1975, an Italian archaeological team discovered over 16,000 clay tablets in Aleppo, Syria, and Tel Mardik. This same team has also discovered biblical cities such as Sodom, Zeboim, Admah, Hazor, and Gaza, all of which we also read in Genesis 10 and in Joshua chapter 1. These tablets date between 2500 BC and 2250 BC. On the tablets in Sumerian and in Sumerograms were names such as Nahor. We read in Genesis 11, verse 22 of the genealogies, and Nahor being the brother of Abraham. Sumerograms predated the Semitic language of Canaan. We also see him listed again in the genealogy that Luke gives us in Luke chapter 3 and verse 34. Among these names, we also see Eber. In Genesis 10 and verse 21, we see he is a great-grandson of Noah's son, Shem. and he was the father of Pelah and Joktan, and an ancestor of Abraham. Eber is also listed in Luke's genealogy when we read Luke chapter 3 and verse 35. Also, we see the name Michael. When Moses sent spies into the land of Canaan, he sent Sethur, the son of Michael, from the tribe of Asher. We read of this in Numbers 13 in verse 13. And then there is the name Ishmael, and this being Abraham's son with Hagar. And this we read of in Genesis 16 in verse 15. These tablets also had many biblical words that were thought to have developed much later than was recorded in the Bible. Words such as the home, used for deep, as we see in Genesis 1 and verse 2. Again, showing that the Bible is accurate and the Bible is dependable. We can have reliance in what we hold in our hands today as the Bible. The Siloam inscription, also called the Silwan inscription, is found in the Siloam tunnel. This is a tunnel that brings water from the Gihon spring to the pool of Siloam. It is located in the city of David in the East Jerusalem. The tunnel was discovered in 1838 by Edward Robinson. The tunnel was studied several times, but the inscription missed until it was found in 1880 by a youth wading up the tunnel. The inscription records the construction of the tunnel and is dated to the 8th century BC. The style of the writing is Paleo-Hebrew, a regional variant of the Phoenician alphabet. It is the oldest record of its kind to date. The ancient city of Jerusalem, being on a mountain, was naturally defensible from almost all sides, but its major source of fresh water, the Gihon spring, was on the side of the cliff overlooking the Kidron Valley. The Bible records that King Hezekiah, fearful that the Assyrians would lay siege to the city, blocked the spring's water outside the city and diverted it through a channel into the pool of Siloam. And this is recorded in 2 Kings 20, verse 20, Isaiah 22 in verse 9 and 11, and in Isaiah 36 through 39. And again we see in 2 Chronicles 32, verses 3 and 4. This tunnel is 1,700 foot in construction. It is a construction that King Hezekiah had made in view of the coming of Sennacherib to attack Jerusalem. The inscription contains 6 lines, of which the first is damaged. In the third line, the word Zada is the only one in question in the whole translation, reading either a crack or a weak part. But the passage reads, the tunnel. And this is the story of the tunnel wall. The axes were against each other, and while 3 cubits were left to cut, the voice of a man called to his counterpart, for there was Zada in the rock, on the right, and on the day of the tunnel being finished, the stonecutters struck each man towards his counterpart, axe against axe, and flowed water from the source of the pool for 1,200 cubits and 100. Cubits was the height over the head of the stonecutters. This is what he is talking about. This tunnel, which we have today, you can go, you can visit this tunnel, you could see the inscription. And it is exactly as recorded in the Bible. In the pages of the Bible, we also read of the Persian king Cyrus, who was responsible for allowing the Israelites, who had been in captivity, to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple and the wall. And we read these in Jeremiah, also in Ezra and in Nehemiah. In Isaiah 44, beginning in verse 24 through chapter 45, verse 7, we read the prophet record 150 years before Cyrus was even born, that God names him by name, Cyrus, and tells us what he will do. He will let the people return to Jerusalem. He names him by name so that we may know that he is God. Only God can predict this type of a thing happening 150 years before it happens, and even tell you the name of the person who is going to do it. And so under the course in the time of the reign of Cyrus, the Israelites, who had been in captivity from the Babylonians, so we see the rise from the Babylonians to the Persian Empire, and now King Cyrus, and it all fits with the prophecy of the 70-year captivity from the time the Jews began to be taken captive to Cyrus beginning to release the first wave of them. It was 70 years. 2 Kings 14, or excuse me, 2 Kings 17, verses 4 and 6. In 1879, a clay cylinder was found in the ruins of Babylon in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. It dates from the 6th century BC, the correct time to match with the Bible's writings. The tablet praises, guess who? Cyrus, and shows him to be descended from a line of kings, and the tablet references Cyrus's defeat of Nabonidus, the king of Babylon. The text also states that Cyrus was welcomed by the people and that he set out to restore the sanctuaries of various cults and to send previously deported people back to their original lands. Now, under the Babylonians, people had been captured and they had been brought from foreign lands. They had been dispersed to keep them apart. Cyrus begins to reverse this. A common practice to stop an enemy from revolting was to carry them away from their homeland, to scatter them about, move them among other people, and take them away. They would be less likely to regroup and reformat a strategy of attack or retaliation. Cyrus was working to reverse this. The result was that the Israelites being returned to Jerusalem just as the Bible recorded. And he allows them to go back to build the wall and to build the temple. Exactly what was prophesied 150 years before. Another interesting inscription is a clay brick discovered in Ur in 1922. Again, modern Iraq. Ur was an important Sumerian city-state in ancient Mesopotamia near the mouth of the Euphrates River. This discovery also dates to the 6th century BC and names Cyrus on it. It reads, Cyrus, king of the world, king of Ashan, the great gods delivered all the lands into my hands, and I made this land dwell in peace. There have also been other brick discoveries with the names Shalmaneser, Sargon, Sennacherib, and Nebuchadnezzar, who is attributed to restoring the temple in Ur. Also, what we read on this tablet of Cyrus matches very similar to what is written in the Bible. We read of Balaam also in the Bible, Numbers chapter 22 through 24, Deuteronomy chapter 23, Joshua 13 and 24, Nehemiah 13, Micah 6, 2 Peter, Jude, and Revelation chapter 2. He was a prophet who was called by Balak to curse the people of Israel. And in the account, he gives into pride and greed. But God tells him he can only do that which God says. He can only carry out God's will. So each time he tries to curse the people, he utters only blessings among them. We also read that the encounter he has with this donkey on the road, and where his donkey speaks to him. And of course, there's an angel in that as well that he did not see at first. Well, in 1967, an inscription was found in Tel Deir Allah on the east bank of the Jordan River. And this had been a flourishing city in the 8th and 7th century BC. Here, there have been what archaeologists believe was a column bearing inscriptions. When discovered, the inscriptions were lying on the floor in fragments. It is believed this was caused by an earthquake around 760 BC. The time is the prophet Amos and King Uzziah. We read in Amos chapter 1, verse 1, and Zechariah 14, verse 5. 119 pieces were examined, and the ink and style suggest an older date. The text speaks of warnings from the book of Balaam, the son of Beor. He was a seer of the gods. We also see in Numbers 22, verse 5, stating the same name and lineage, and 2 Peter 2, verses 15 and 16, identifying Balaam as a prophet. Again, archaeology helping to support what we read in the Bible and allowing us to know that the Bible is accurate and the Bible is true. Previously, we have examined the Tel Dan stele and the Kirk monolith. The Tel Dan inscription was from the 9th century BC and mentions the house of David and king of Israel. The Kirk monolith mentions King Ahab in a battle against Shalmaneser. The Merneptah stele was found in 1896 at Thebes in Egypt. It is now in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, The text of the stele mostly speaks of Pharaoh Memetah's victory over the Libyans and their allies. In the last line in the hieroglyphics, though, it mentions Israel. This is one of the only 4 ancient inscriptions referring to Israel and the oldest Egyptian reference to Israel. The inscription says it was carved in the 5th century or in the 5th year of Meneptah of the 19th dynasty, 1208 BC. And the final two lines mention a campaign in Canaan where Meneptah says he defeated and destroyed Ashkelon, Gezer, Yenom, and Israel. This is interesting as it coincides with the revolt of the Canaanite cities beginning the end of Egypt's control over Canaan. Some have put Israel entering Canaan around the 9th century BC. This would place it at the early 13th century BC. The last evidence of Egyptian influence can be seen in Megiddo, where Ramses VI has his name carved on a statue dating from 1141 to 1133 BC. The inscription reads, "The princes are prostrate, saying, 'Peace.' Not one is raising his head among the 9 bows. Now that Tenanu, Libya, has come to ruin, Hatti is pacified. The Canaan has been plundered into every sort of woe. Ashkelon has been overcome. Gezer has been captured. Yenom is made non-existent. Israel is laid waste, and his seed is not. Heru has become a widow because of Egypt. 9 bows is a reference to the enemies of Egypt, which varied upon the situation. Hatti and Heru are Syro-Palestine, or a reference to ancient Israelites. Canaan and Israel are smaller units within the larger. Ashkelon, Gezer, and Yenom are cities. At that time, all these were under the rule of Egypt. The Babylonian Chronicles are a series of 3 tablets recording major events in Babylonian history. The Chronicles cover from the time of Nebuchadnezzar up to the Parthian period, that would be from 8th century BC to the 3rd century BC. They were written by Babylonian astrologers or Chaldeans. The tablets were acquired through antique dealers in the 19th century and are from unknown excavations, but are what is called unprovenanced, which means we cannot detail their history because they were taken from their original locations and have been handed down through people from various locations and times. Currently, they are in the British Museum. However, the tablets are dated to the 6th century BC and are written in Babylonian from the Achaemenid period, or First Persian period, founded by Cyrus the Great, 550 to 400 BC. The tablets describe Nebuchadnezzar's first decade as king, along with the political and military exploits, including his invasion of Israel in the late 7th and early 6th century BC. It also speaks of the siege of 597 BC. The Chronicle does not refer to Jerusalem directly, but mentions a city of Yahudu, interpreted to be the city of Judah. The Chronicle states, in the 7th year of Nebuchadnezzar, 599 BC, in the month Chislev, November, December, the king of Babylon assembled his army, and after he had invaded the land of Hatti, Syria and Palestine, he laid siege to the city of Judah. On the 2nd day of the month of Adar, which would be 16th of March, he conquered the city and took the king, Jeconiah, prisoner. He installed in his place King Zedekiah of his own choice, and after he had received rich tribute, he sent forth to Babylon. We read in Jeremiah 24, verse 1, of Jeconiah being taken captive. We'll also see this in Esther 2, verse 6, and Jeremiah chapter 27, verse 20. And we also read of Zedekiah being king of Judah in Jeremiah 28, in verse 1, and in 2 Kings 24, verse 17, telling us it was made so by the king of Babylon. The Chronicle is said to confirm the date of the first siege of Jerusalem, As there is no extra biblical sources of the second siege of Jerusalem in 587 BC, the date was arrived at by comparing the evidence of the chronicle to dates in the book of Ezekiel in connection to the year of captivity of Jeconiah. In Isaiah 39, Isaiah makes a prophecy of the coming of Babylon to carry them away as slaves. These activities correspond with prophecies and histories found in Jeremiah, 2 Chronicles 36, and 2 Kings 24. It is the only identified chronicle referring to Nebuchadnezzar and does not occur or does not cover the whole of his reign. As such, the subsequent destruction and exile recorded in the Bible that have taken place 10 years later are not covered in the Chronicles or elsewhere in the archaeological record. They do, however, confirm the historicity of Nebuchadnezzar II, who we do read of in the book of Daniel. Once again, the information that we find in the archaeological record corresponds with that we read of in the biblical narrative. We see that history and the Bible are not separate and apart from one another, but are occurring at the same time because the Bible is history. It is a book from God of truth, but it contains truth. And in that truth is the historical record. And again, as we find these tablets and these inscriptions and these rings, all these things, none of which have ever shown contradictory to what the Bible tells us. Each and all have only furthered our knowledge and understanding that the Bible is true and the Bible is accurate. We can have faith in the Bible. And knowing all these things in the Bible that are true, when God tells us that we need to repent, that we need to confess Him, that we need to be baptized, it's the truth. He's telling us what we need to know for life. And we can have assurance of that because of things like the archaeological record, which help us to always see that God never lies. Remember, God loves you, and so do I.